بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to the start of the series for Ramadan during this COVID outbreak. And this series is focusing not on the physical illness and all the suffering that people are having physically in the hospital, being sick, or being sick at home. This is focusing on the spiritual, mental aspect and the psychological aspect of this outbreak, on which has had an impact on all of us. And inshallah, we have every Saturday for the next 3 Saturdays, we have speakers. We will be focusing on resilience building, among other like psychological effects. I am honored today to introduce both Imam Kamal Ayubi and Sister J Star. So I'm going to start with Imam Kamal. He grew up in the Los Angeles, California area. He received his bachelor degree from San Francisco State University in visual art in 1998. And then he received his religious and spiritual education and training under the Islamic Supreme Council of America. He was appointed as an imam in 2002, and then he received his chaplaincy training at Beaumont CPE Center in Royal Oak, Michigan, where he worked until 2015, and then he joined University of Michigan. I got to know him at University of Michigan. MashaAllah, he's extremely personal. People really loves him and enjoy his services. I felt it was a huge addition to a big university to have a Muslim imam chaplain, which take care of all the Muslim patients. Today we will be, inshallah, benefiting from him through this session of resilience. Moving to Sister J, many of you have known her as a very active, mashallah, community member within our Ann Arbor community. She received her master degree in Islamic Studies and Interfaith Relations. She has a master in Islamic Studies and Interfaith Relations, and she's a graduate. She has a graduate certificate in Islamic Chaplaincy from Hartford Seminary, and has clinical training at San Jose Health System and University of Michigan. Her background is in disaster relief, refugee services, and peace building. So as I mentioned, we know her a lot, mashallah, as a very, very active community member. And also, alhamdulillah, we have her and her husband also is a Muslim chaplain in the jail. I cannot remember the actual name of the jail, but mashallah, both of them are extremely active. And I want to say Jazakumullah khairan for doing this and taking the time. Just a quick couple points before we go ahead and start. If you have a question, please go ahead and write it in the chat sessions. And if it is relevant, I might just post the question during the session, but most often we're just gonna postpone it until the Q&A session after. And then we'll see if there's enough time. We might allow some folks to ask the question directly. And we'll go ahead and start with Brother Kamal. Jazakumullah khair.
وإياكم. الحمد لله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's a great honor to be here with you to speak about resilience, and we'll get into that shortly, to be with Jay, and I give thanks for just being with the Ann Arbor Masjid community today. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala open up the doors of mercy for us and bring our hearts and souls together with that love and mercy. And inshallah, we hope to get into the information. So let's see. Jay, you can give me a cue when you want me to go ahead.
All right, we are ready. Bismillah. Thank you so much for the opening, brothers. Today, we're going to be talking about developing resiliency in ourselves and others. And a little bit of background on this is that Chaplain Kamau and myself both work in a hospital setting where we do a lot of work with people across faith traditions and with no faith traditions at all. So chaplains are spiritual care professionals who provide a compassionate presence for everybody in the institution that they serve. The material that we're drawing from came out of clinical work, and we were both just struck by what beautiful congruence there is within the Islamic tradition when you look at these things. And so today we're going to do a little bit of both and. So we're going to share the clinical foundation, but we're also going to make the connections that we find within Islam, which are so profoundly beautiful today. And inshallah, there'll be benefit for it. We're going to talk about grief and grieving. We'll look at resiliency. That'll be where we'll really focus a lot of today. We'll just give brief bits on deep listening and on legacy projects as well. And the goal is that all of these will be of assistance to you in helping you through this time of pandemic. But I'm also mindful that we as a Muslim community have come through so many hardships in so many regards. We have refugees in our midst. We have ethnic and religious we are all religious minorities, but we also have ethnic and racial minorities who have experienced hardship in different ways. We are a group among us that has tremendous practice with these things. And so part of what we're doing is looking at how we have endured hardship in the past and remembering to help us move forward in the future. We are also reminded that this can be harder for people who have had hardship in the past that haven't learned the skills of resilience. And so inshallah, moving forward, these will be of assistance to people. Do next slide. I want to talk a little bit briefly here, and I know that we've got some mental health professionals who'll be speaking later in the series and may address this, but for those of you who aren't familiar or who may have forgotten, when our bodies and our souls experience trauma, like we are right now with this time of pandemic, when there's a lot of fear and uncertainty, the body actually has a physiochemical response that impacts us in a multitude of ways. So just as one example of that, we see higher levels of diabetes oftentimes in people who experience continuous and long-term stress. And one of that is because there's a hormone that's secreted in the body that alters the blood sugar and leads to cravings. And so there's a huge cycle that goes between, and there's certainly more knowledgeable people about this that can speak further in depth. But what I want you to take away is an understanding that what you're experiencing can change your body chemistry. And you need to learn to adapt and to adjust and also to process these chemicals out of your body to help yourself to regulate. Another part of this is that in high anxiety situations, the rational brain is oftentimes the last to know. So our thought process is complicated. You may have found that you started out with this planning to get a ton of things done at home, and suddenly it becomes much harder to do them all because you're not processing and functioning as you may normally. All right, go right ahead, come on. And you can go right to the next one too. So the first part of what we're going to talk about today is grief. What we are all experiencing right now is grief, and that comes in a multitude of different ways. And oftentimes when we think about grief, we think about what we feel after somebody has died. But grief comes with so many things. Whenever we have had expectations that something would happen and it hasn't, that feeling that we experience is grief. And there's a lot of talk about stages of grief. I like to think of them as components because we tend to cycle back through them at different times. And the components, as we typically talk about in chaplaincy work, are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, and increasingly we talk about meaning making. These come out in a lot of different ways. Anybody who has small children in the house, or perhaps children at all, may notice that there are a lot more angry outbursts happening right now. Oftentimes, they're not actually upset about what it seems like they're upset about. They're upset because there's a change in routine, there's increased anxiety and uncertainty, and they're missing how things used to be. They're grieving that. So when we see anger come out, oftentimes it is a secondary emotion to grief. We are also in a time of anticipatory grief. So we may be concerned that people we love are not going to survive. We may be concerned that things won't go back to normal. We may be concerned that we are going to lose our financial security if we had it to begin with. And we may be concerned about the greater implications if we didn't. And so there's all of that anxiety that can build up when we talk about anticipatory grief. It's also a time of complicated grieving. We are not necessarily getting to be at the bedside with people as we might have been in the hospital traditionally, but we're also not getting to mourn the way we traditionally have. And we talk about that with regards to people dying, but also when we have hardships right now, we can't go out and have a cup of tea with our friends in the way that we may have in the past to facilitate that process. And that's because there's a difference between grief and grieving. So grief is to have the emotion, but the grieving is the working it through, the meaning making, the processing, and the experiencing of it. And that's what helps our body to find a new normal and to make peace with where we're at. All right, Kamal, I'm going to pass it over to hear from you.
Okay. You're going to say something else?
I just noticed that Christine can only see this, is not able to see the slides. She's only seeing the presenter. If you go up to it should be in the top right corner, Christine, there's a little gray box and you can swap between presenter mode or gallery mode, I believe. And I think if you do it to gallery mode, it should bring up those slides, inshallah.
If you're viewing on a computer, you could just see there are like viewing options in the middle top, and then you could switch between.
All right, ready? So now we'll talk about resilience. And here's a basic definition of resilience. And I just want people to kind of listen for where these terms are connected to our tradition and where we might relate to them as strengths that we may notice in ourselves and in our family members. So resilience is the use of intention, thought, and behavior to adapt well, actually, when challenges arise. Maintaining physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being during and after a challenge, right? So we see these aspects of, in our Islamic tradition, of that actions are according to intention, al-amalu bin-niyya. So it's already built in that our intentions are powerful. And when we're under stress, when we're under difficulty, when we're under anxiety, that becomes something that perhaps we can reclaim is our intentions in this time, you know, which affects our thinking process. So if our intentions are rooted in mercy and compassion for ourselves and other people, then we can start to, you know, that can shape our thought process of how do we want to go about our days? What is it that we can do to sort of grasp the power of our intention and respond to situations rather than react? So we'll get more into that. So we'll start into this idea of soul care or self-care and mercy. This is a language that's spreading through the sort of society, and especially in hospitals, because people are getting burnt out, generally speaking, with the pace of life. And so there comes this concern about how do we take care of ourselves? And so there's a lot of research on that in terms of how we respond to stress, to burnout, and what people in general, like psychologists and people of wellness and behavioral studies are going into is self-compassion, right? They talk about self-compassion as this one aspect of study that can help us get through difficult times and through burnout. And it happens that this corresponds with our Islamic traditions in that mercy is the foremost, mercy and compassion is the foremost attribute of Allah, describing himself as Ar-Rahman, all compassionate. And so when we're talking about the self, we can also think of that in Islamic terms as a composite. The nafs is actually this composite of body, mind, and spirit, right? That you have the physical component of the self, you have emotional and mental component of the self, you have the spiritual components of the self, and that's all on a spectrum within us, that we experience these aspects of ourselves, and our tradition reminds us of that. So very important at the foremost is to remember mercy, to invoke mercy, as we think about caring for ourselves, as we think about taking care of ourselves. And so we have the ayah, as a famous ayah from Surah to Yusuf, وَمَا أُبَرِّئُ نَفْسِي أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وَمَا أُبَرِّئُ نَفْسِي إِنَّ النَّفْسَ لَأَمَارَةٌ بِالسُّوءِ إِلَّا مَا رَحِمَ رَبِّي إِنَّ رَبِّي غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. So there's this speech of Sayyidina Yusuf, peace be upon him, that he doesn't excuse himself or make himself innocent, and he recognizes that the self has problems in it. It has this sort of problematic aspect. There's a problem with having a self, except with the mercy of God. So when the mercy of God is present, then it gives us this sort of platform to work through the stages of ourselves, because the self is not only limited to being oppressive. Okay, there's more to the self, and we'll get to that in this following slide. So again, invoking mercy, that intentionality of awareness of the mercy of God and taking care of ourselves and our loved ones. So this is these are terms that some may be familiar with. I mean, of course, if you read the Quran, then you'll find that the self is actually examined on a scale of experience, right? We experience ourselves in different ways. And this has been diagrammed in this to point out that there's the nafs al-amara, right? There's the self that commands us, which, being in Ramadan, we're really taking charge of our physicality by refraining from food, water, sex, right? Refraining from behaviors where our awareness is heightened. And so the nafs al-amara that commands us to eat this, eat that, snack on this, snack on that, go here, go there, is really restricted. And then you move up to the different levels of the self, the nafs al-lawama, nafs al-mulhama, mutma'ina, radia, mardia, and kamila. So this is the tyrannical self, the blaming, critical self. You may find that, you know, sometimes when we're stressed out, we become overly critical, start nitpicking on each other. We start over criticizing ourselves to the point where we're pushed back from being productive. So that blaming self is something to be aware of. That am I under this stressful time being more critical of everything around me? Am I criticizing my family? You know, how can I bring back that mercy? And so we need to be aware that we can sort of graduate through these layers of the self. For example, the nafs al-mulhama, alhamaha fujuraha wa taqwaha. So there's this inspired self within us that's aware of its rebelliousness and aware of its taqwa, of its God consciousness. So with that aspect of the self, to pay attention that when you make an intention of mercy and compassion in your day, that you can listen and find ways into inspiration, right? What is it that you can do in this time differently? How can you adjust to this time differently? What are those thoughts that are moving you into service in different ways, or to pay attention to solutions that are coming about in a crisis? Nafs al-mutma'inna, the tranquil self, is speaking of this aspect that is part of our worship, right? When we pray, in each position, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is commanding us to find a sense of tranquility and cultivate a sense of tranquility when we're in sajda and in the movements of our ibadah. We have that opportunity to slow down. When we're making our ablutions, we have the opportunity to cultivate a relationship with tranquility, even in the midst of, you know, what's going on around us. So to be able to honor and let us remember that that's a part of ourself, that's a part of our soul. Nafs al-radia, this is the self that is content with the decree of God, right? That's truly in a state of beautiful patience with God, sabran jamila, you know? And that may be something that opens up as we continue in Ramadan and we're wrestling through and we have this mercy coming down in this month and we're reading Quran, that we start to get in touch with a sense of contentment with God. You know, I'm happy with my Lord, radaitu billahi rabban, right? So, and then there's that self nafs al-mardiya, that that God is pleased with, and that you feel that connection and that sense of relationship despite of what's going on, that you have this sense of peacefulness and pleasure and happiness with God, and that God is happy with you. And then nafs al-kamila, of course, this is actually the most perfected aspect of self, and that's represented in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam could be said to be the most resilient of human beings, who bounced back from so many things in his life, from being losing his loved ones, from losing his children, from being attacked by his family. So constant transition in the Prophet's life, but his ability to still be kind, to still be gentle, to still be loving, to still be just, it's a representation of that that perfected self of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And verily, you are on the most noble of character, Ya Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that's the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this gives us a map. It's not about that you will always stay at one level, but let's think about our identity in a broadened sense. Are we struggling with on one of these levels? Like nafsul amara is something that people will be struggling every day, but can we graduate into the mercy of God throughout a given day or a given hour, or the course of the month of Ramadan? So now we're going to look at a couple of different maps of what we might be experiencing. We can't go in full depth about that, but we're going to give some different models relating these concepts of the self, but also in the Islamic tradition, but also this aspect of what happens when we're under stress, and how we can see ourselves on a continuum, on a spectrum. We may go back and forth during a given day or given week, and how can we be aware of that and respond to that? So this is a model that actually comes out of the military, and it's been used by first responders, people who respond to disasters, and healthcare workers as well. But what I also wanted to say is just to sort of be aware, self-aware of where we may be on the spectrum. And Jay, if I'm losing time, let me know, okay? So we have these different sections here: ready, reacting, injured, and ill. And ready can include that person that just feels, you feel ready to respond to your day. You feel okay about, you feel adjusted, you've adapted, right? You feel fairly well in the midst of things. If you're there, alhamdulillah. I know I haven't been there this whole time during this pandemic. I've struggled with different levels of this spectrum. On another level, you may be reacting, right? Some of your function is lost, or you're feeling like you're just not who you used to be before the pandemic. You don't feel like you're up to the bar of life. Well, this is a natural response to such a major world event. And it's just important to realize that there will be times when we are reactive, and just to be conscious of that and how we can sort of respond and be aware. You have injured, that's where it's more severe, okay? It's something that is going on with us. There's a scar that's been left, or we're just chronically in stress, chronically down, but still able to maintain some level of functioning, but it can lead to more outbreaks in our mood in terms of rage or panic or depression. The feelings of guilt or shame are stronger. And the reason why I put the stress continuum with wellness and spiritual bypassing is because sometimes in our religious communities, our response to kayfa halik is alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. But really beneath that, we might be chronically frustrated or chronically angry, and we need safe spaces to say, hey, I'm really stressed today. This is really taking its toll on me. I feel like I don't want to eat at all, or that I'm eating excessively, or that my children are going through such such changes and responding in ways that they haven't in the past. And alhamdulillah ala kulli hal, but at the same time, let's not just use religion to bypass what we might be struggling through. You know, let's call upon family support, peer support, calling counselors or getting some help is needed to respond to things that just don't seem to be going away. And then there's the ill, the red zone, and that's where things may come up, such as, you know, severe depression, suicidality, substance abuse. So that's where, you know, healthcare providers may be appropriate at that point. If you're feeling chronically down, when people are really losing hope, it's just important to say, I know my limit. I'm not able to just sit and listen to my friend or family member. I want to refer them to the hospital. You know, they need a professional care at this point. And so I just raised this up to be sort of to bring up this normalcy of, in times of chronic change that we're going through, we may experience a number of these, and it's human. It's what humans experience on a scale. And the question is, what is the appropriate response at a given time? You know, so that's another sort of, you can find the stress continuum online and sort of read the details and spend more time if you want to get an insight to things that you or loved ones may be experiencing. Jay, do you want to speak on this one?
Yeah, so Kamau and I went back and forth on these two because I think they both capture a lot really well. You may have seen this being passed around on the internet. And I think it captures a similar version of what he's just walked us through. And for the sake of time, I think we'll keep right on going. Though I think the one thing that I would say is that the recognition that you will change from hour to hour and day to day, and that you have a lot of control how you respond to things as they come your way, but you don't necessarily have the ability, in fact, we know you don't have the ability because they come from God, to control what comes your way to begin with. And so that constant point of adaptation and checking in with yourself and seeing what changes you need to make to grow back to the zone where you want to be doing well.
Yeah, and maybe just, you know, again, to emphasize, there are these, that emphasis of, you know, are you in constant fear and anxiety, or are you able to cope and overcome your anxieties, and how to get the support you need along the way. If you feel like this just isn't going away, don't isolate. We're in social isolation, so to speak, but harboring this isolation is not recommended. Reach out, have a buddy system, you know, reach out to those people that you know are more vulnerable. And again, just a reminder that I know for myself, when this pandemic first came about, I definitely was not feeling my best. Being in the hospital, I felt the heaviness of the time, that everything is shut down. People are wearing masks. I'm no longer interacting interpersonally with people. And, you know, I had to really take stock of that. Entering into Ramadan, you know, I didn't feel my best. And so I started to change my diet and you know, do more fluids and high nutrition foods to tune myself up to be able to adapt to Ramadan in a healthier way. Because chronic stress shows up in the body, and there's only so long we can just get by before it shows up in a way that is more serious. So just remembering that chronic traumatic stress shows up in the body in various ways.
So researchers have relatively recently begun trying to identify what it is that allows some people to be resilient, that is to bounce back or even to bounce forward after they've experienced hardship. And as they look at people who have survived wars, who have survived serious illnesses, difficult divorces, abuse, a whole variety of things, there's reoccurring themes and trends that come up that in the people who seem to do the best. And those are physical wellness, healthy thoughts, reflection, awareness, control, and that needs fine tuning a little bit. We'll talk more about it, and connection. And what's beautiful is when you begin to look in greater depth at each of these, you find our faith lined out in them. And so Kamau's going to go through point by point and pull out some of those. Kamau, just a little bit of time check here. I know we started late, but we're going to need to move a little bit quickly on these.
Okay, so physical wellness, of course, being in Ramadan, that's even more heightened, right? We're going without food and water for long periods of time. We're going without sleep? Are we hydrating, at night? Are we putting an emphasis? The Prophet ﷺ would eat like dates and watermelon because it's a balanced food, hot, dry, cold, moist. Are we conscious of that? How does that affect our response to life? So also the to physically discharge stress, recognizing that our bodies need care as well as our minds and our spirits. Healthy thoughts. And Jay, please feel free if you feel moved to speak in any of this. Just thinking in terms of when we're reading the Quran, how does this relate to the inner self and the things that we think about as far as dhikrullah? The Quran is a reminder of Allah's mercy. It's a reminder of Allah's forgiveness. It's a reminder to move through and eliminate qualities that are harmful to ourselves and others. So just this whole idea of dhikr being the foundation of reminding ourselves of those qualities needing right now. Do you need al-wadud? Do you need al-qarib? Do you need al-ghafur rahim? We need all of them, but just to be conscious of that and to bring that deeper into your being. You want to say something about the gratitude journal? Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that I've done in the past is, and I know many people have the practice of a gratitude journal, but an added point, there's a point where we can say, Alhamdulillah, like this was wonderful, and thanks be to God for it. And then there's another column for the things where we know to say Alhamdulillah, because that is the teaching of our faith, though it's harder to see the goodness in this time. It's what I would call the delayed. We have had hardship that we're struggling with, and we say Alhamdulillah because we know that in it there is goodness from God, but we haven't found it yet. So I like to do two columns. One is acknowledging what I'm really able to fully welcome and celebrate now, and the other is the acknowledgement of the things I'm still processing, I'm still meaning making, I'm still seeking to try to find the reason for them from God in my life.
Yeah. The Prophet ﷺ said to contemplate for an hour is better than, they say like 1 year, there's different riwayah, but 7 years, 60 years. So just to be contemplative, to be able to reflect on not only the things that are harming you, and sort of journaling those things out. What are these habits that I just need to be conscious are bothering me? Because it's not just about, oh, I'm always positive. I have to be positive. No, there may be things that really are eating away at you that you need to be able to articulate and sort out. That once you can articulate that, it's no longer dominating your thought as much. You can put it in perspective, which is actually tied in with the idea of reflection, the self-discovery piece. Jay, do you want to say anything about this?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that's really important with research shows is to keep the reflection in the present, rather than getting worried about things ahead or things behind props. How are you doing right now? Where are you in your relationship with God today? The thing about trauma and hardship is that it can also become an opportunity for self-discovery. So that reflection on how are you changing over this process, and it can help to figure out what is it that you're doing well in the midst of this. Those can be hard to hold up sometimes. And sometimes doing well might be just the smallest thing. Like you got out of bed today and prayed Fajr, like alhamdulillah, and that is great. And growing inshallah, to the bigger things that will come with that. The biggest thing that I would say about reflection is that in a world and an age of distractions, it's really easy to avoid being with your thoughts. So taking time to remove yourself from things. Don't open your phone when you're doing something. Just take time to sit and to think and to wait, because those are the times that allow us to touch in and see how we're doing. I don't know about others, but I typically fast from Facebook during Ramadan, and I find that over the course of it, my attention span is increased. I also take Safari off my phone, so there's nothing there except the phone and WhatsApp, so I can keep in touch with family and close friends. But I would encourage you to figure out ways to remove the distractions, because it'll increase your space for reflection.
Yeah. So reflection is a part of our tradition. Fikr, fakara, fikr, tafakkur is it's a virtue, you know, and to contemplate the heavens and the earth, to contemplate ourselves. And that's where the aspect of recognizing ourselves on a spectrum, acknowledging that this is how Allah created us. He created us with layers of the self. And as you pray, you can sort of honor the fact, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you tranquility, you know, that is something that's not physically tangible, but it's spiritually something to celebrate. If you're in your ibadah and Allah gives you ilham, he gives you a message to, for example, serve in a particular way, you know, to write that down. Don't just dismiss it as something that is in passing, or write these things down so that maybe they can be implemented and benefit a person. Some people get really creative during crisis, and that's a sign of that inspired self being honored. So awareness, someone may say, you know, taqwa is the most basic manifestation. You know, we're reminded of taqwa all the time in the Quran, but we have so many people out here, and this is as a chaplain in the hospital, are struggling to establish that sense of presence and being peaceful and being grounded. They say, in what quality are you grounded in? Are you truly grounded in compassion today? Are you truly grounded in love today? Or are you grounded in anxiety today? Are you grounded in irritation? And how to sort of bring yourself back. We have this blessing of the wudu, the intention and the wudu, using water as a soothing for ourselves, and the ghusl, the body scan. This is something that is taught in a lot of wellness circles, but we have that in our Islamic tradition, that mindfulness of our whole being through the practices of wudu, of ghusl. Don't take that for granted. That's a big ni'mah for resilience and staying connected to our bodies, our minds, and our spirits, to be conscious, make tawbah, turn to Allah. Allah loves those who purify themselves and continuously make tawbah to Allah. And alhamdulillah, huwa tawwab rahim. Allah turns to us and gives us mercy. Anything else about that one?
Yeah, can I just say briefly with grounding activities? These are what I think of the, you know, sort of the subhanallah moments in our day. If you have a time where you feel like your anxiety is increasing, where you feel your heart start to go quick or to be short of breath, one of the things that you can do is to help ground yourself in your body. So look for sight, sound, smell, physical feel, and taste. It may be something like find 3 things that are blue. But I think it's also, I think of the grounding when we see those beautiful things and we take the moment and we say, subhanallah. So when you feel those moments of anxiety coming, looking, smelling, listening for the things that you can say subhanallah for.
Mm-hmm. Anxiety is a very interesting subject. I do a lot of psychiatric work and in the hospital, and just, you know, thinking about it holistically. If you are having chronic anxiety, this does not equate a weakness of faith. Okay, if you're having chronic depression, this does not equate a weakness of faith. It may be challenging your faith, but it also may be inviting you to a deeper question about what is the source of this anxiety, you know, and that may be something that we learn over a lifetime. But again, having hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us get under the surface of the things that are really showing up in our lives, like anxiety. And sometimes we do need the intervention of medicine to help us cope with these things when they get extreme. And the Prophet ﷺ, he did spiritual healing, but he also did physical healing, and he recommended diet as medicine. So pharmacology is an extension of that, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. Jay, did you want to say?
Yeah, sure. So control is a hard one in situations of hardship because we oftentimes don't have control. But we know that one of the things that increases people's resilience is their ability to identify what they do have control and take over it. So we had a webinar or a live stream or pretty early in the pandemic. And one of the things we talked about was writing our wills and our advanced directives. And I think about that as like a beautiful teaching from Islam that helps us to take control over little things that we can make decisions about. If you have children right now, the choice between the peanut butter and jelly or the grilled cheese or any other things that you can find where you give them two options. You get to choose what the options are, but it allows them to have a little bit of control over their day. And that regaining of control over the things that one can have control over is an indicator, is a exercise for increasing your resiliency. As you're thinking about setting goals, be gentle on yourself. You know, because our brains and our bodies are not operating as they usually would, we need to scale back a little bit. If you are planning to read the entire Quran, but you don't regularly read Quran every day, and you're falling behind now, don't beat yourself up and don't give up. Go ahead and set a smaller goal that you'll read Quran for X number of minutes a day. And if you finish it, alhamdulillah, that's great. But find a goal that's manageable. And the other one is seeking out ways to help others. You know, the Prophet ﷺ, through all of the hardship, he was still always incredibly generous and seeking ways to help people. And we know that in helping people, it helps ourselves as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I would also just add, you know, there's so many places that people are being asked to give to right now financially. I also recognize that for many people, finances are a hardship or are a source of fear and anxiety. There are many, many ways to help people beyond financially. So just providing someone to listen to can be tremendous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, this is just the power of the importance of intention, of a phrase that we take for granted, of saying Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. And Allah asks us to remember him excessively. And why is that? Because it takes a sense of our awareness from the surface of life into the depths of life. When we repeat something, when we remember Allah's name, that name starts to go deeper and deeper into our consciousness. It expands our heart, right? Rabbi Shrah li Sadri, expansive heart. When your heart is expanded by Allah through your remembrance, it gives you this sense of ease, right? That, oh, I'm more aware that the mercy of Allah is surrounding me. And when I make an intention of good, I'm more aware that Allah's attribute of a Rahim is going to meet me there. I'm going to meet my Lord today through this attribute of mercy. What better sense of safety and security in yourself than feeling that intimate meeting between your heart's intention and Allah's Rahim, Allah's Rahmah descending on you. So I always like to emphasize, come back to mercy, come back to mercy. La taqnatu min rahmatillah. Don't despair or cut yourself from the mercy of God. As Jay had said, don't be so hard on yourself. Move towards Allah. Go to fafirru ilallah. Run towards Allah. Such an essential part, you know, and what we're all sort of struggling with in this time of social isolation, and you know, having to be creative about or courageous about connecting in different ways that are helpful for us. Jay, do you want to say more about that one?
No, I think probably for the sake of time, we should go quickly, but I will just say that, like, subhanAllah, I've been out of fasting for 5 years with small children and unable to go to anything at the masjid because it's been so late at night and I've been worn out. And subhanAllah, this is actually the most socially connected Ramadan that I have had in years. And I pray that as we move out of pandemic mode, we'll continue to make opportunities like live streams available so that those who are elderly and sick and pregnant and have so many other reasons why they're not able to come to the masjid will still be able to access the masjid in the way that we've been able to this Ramadan, because MCA, mashallah, has adapted beautifully and it's been extraordinary.
Yeah. So that connection is essential to our human well-being. You know, don't if you can prevent yourself from harboring isolation at space, where are the safe spaces just to be yourself, to say, hey, I'm really stressed out. Where do I go to feel connected? A buddy system is very important. Maybe some people are not comfortable with large groups. Has the community developed sort of like buddy system? If not, you know, it's something that's considered. Just to sort of sponsor each other along the way through this.
Yeah, so the last two things we're going to talk about here are deep listening and legacy projects. And you can go right to the next slide, Kamal. And I like to think of this as really the sunnah of listening, because if we look at the Prophet ﷺ and how he approached listening to people when they came to him with hardships, he didn't just tell them that they needed to go pray right away. He didn't tell them that they had weak faith. He listened to them first. He heard what they were feeling. He often reflected it back to them. And this time is a time when people need to have somebody to listen to, because when we experience traumatic events, our brains don't process information in the same way. And so usually you have a string of events that are all strung out with a degree of order. And when traumatic events occur, they all get jumbled up. And the process of talking through them allows them to get strung back into order like beads on a string. But people have to go through that process. They may need to take time to write it. They may need to take time to say it over and over again. And if you find yourself coming back to different thoughts over and over again when you're talking to people, it's probably a natural indicator that your body needs some time, your brain needs some time to make sense of those and to process them. So don't run away from that. In fact, open to that and take time and say, what is it about this that I'm still trying to put together? And tell the story as many times as you need to get that into place. And in the deep listening part of things, what you're really doing is being present for people and just giving them the opportunity to talk through it, not thinking about how you're going to respond or sharing a story of how you have experienced similar situations, but hearing them fully and giving them time and space. One of my favorite questions that I'll ask patients at the hospital when I sense that they're trying to understand what they're experiencing is, tell me more. Just an open-ended, tell me more. I want to understand what you're experiencing. And this is another point, again, where we want to avoid spiritual bypassing. And so there's been research done, for example, if you look at people who are experiencing cancer, they can't have people make the meaning for them, right? They need to come to that themselves. And there may be ways to do that by allowing them to speak through it. But if you say, for example, let's say somebody has had a child die, saying to that person, well, alhamdulillah, you already have at least you have two other children. A person may come into down the road when they're in their grief, they may work through it to a point where they can say, alhamdulillah, I do have these other two children. But hearing it from you it's gonna create a shutdown. They need to get to that point where they come to it themselves. And so simply being the person they can talk to get to that point will help them more than giving them that meaning themselves. Because when they come to it themselves, it'll be fully theirs. Anything you want to add on that, Kamal?
This is the quality of Allah. Allah is Sami', you know. Allah is the one who listens, right? Amazing, right? So, and it's the quality of the Prophet ﷺ, right? He was the people of Jahiliyyah. I don't think they were known for listening too much to each other, but they actually mocked him for, you know, giving his full attention to people and actually listening to people. What a revolutionary thought, right? So there's this deep wisdom to listen for, you know, the way we ask questions may be like, well, why is this happening? Why is this happening to us? Or what is the wisdom of this? And just listening. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can send ilham. The wisdom of this is that I need to slow down. The wisdom of this is that I need to pay more attention and really care more about how I present myself to my loved ones, you know, slow down, let them feel heard. So.
Thank you. All right, so you can go right to the next one here. The last thing I want to talk about briefly with you is the idea of a legacy project. And this comes out of work done by the Death Doula organization and or sort of concept in terms of end-of-life care. And it's a legacy project is an activity that supports reflection and meaning making. So when we were talking about the stages of grief earlier, that last stage there, the meaning making process. And this can happen at end of life or leading up to it. And it can also happen after somebody has died. And in this time where we have isolation and we have perhaps anticipatory grief that somebody may die, or we may not have the chance to see them again before this time of pandemic passes. And also a grief where people have died and where we haven't necessarily had the opportunity to be at the bedside with them in the same way. A legacy project is an activity that you can engage with as an individual or as a family that can help to ease the grieving. I'm also struck, subhanAllah, in our tradition, when we gather at the bedside of a person who is approaching death, one of the things that we're called upon to do is to share honorable stories of the person. And I think of that as so much like a legacy project. And a legacy project can take many different forms. So it could look like a letter. In my family, we have a letter that was written generations ago in the 1870s from a grandmother to her grandchildren. And she shares the story of her life, and some of it is incredibly mundane. But when we read a letter now that was written in the 1870s, the mundane is really remarkable. It could look like a cookbook, gathering together all of the recipes that your mother has made, perhaps, or that you would like to pass on. An oral history is the opportunity to interview someone. So the beautiful thing about Zoom is that if we can't be in person with somebody, perhaps we have the opportunity to do a recorded oral history with them from afar. It's a great opportunity right now, particularly if you have teenagers at home or even younger children, to invite them to interview their grandparents about things that they've experienced in their lives. The other thing that I'd present is the idea of a tafsir, and not necessarily a formal tafsir, but perhaps an informal one. So the question to somebody who you're worried might not survive about, what is a chapter of the Quran or even just a verse of the Quran that has been important to you at different points in your lives, and what has it meant for you? How has it played out in your life? So that opportunity to learn their connection with the Quran can be a really beautiful one. And the other thing is to think about those who maybe have an isnad to hadith or to tajweed, and having the opportunity to connect right now to continue that train of transmission. What we find in chaplaincy work is that when people have the opportunity to reflect on their life or on the life of their loved one, that can help create peace with dying. It is not always easy, but it can be one part that helps to contribute to that. So rich opportunities for that. And Kamau, unless you want to add anything there, I think we can move into questions if there are any.
I just explore, thinking about this idea of legacy and how, the Prophet ﷺ, his last sermon was sort of his summary of he's being forthcoming with, look, this is my final, things are coming to an end, putting this out there and summarizing my message. These are the things that were really important to me, and this is how I want it to be. So please carry that on. And I see that in contrast often to, in the hospital, in end-of-life situations where all the emphasis becomes on survival with the machines. And it's a very stressful time where people cannot focus on the sacredness of the story. They're focused on the externals. And by that time, these final memories are really technological and medical based rather than spiritually and emotionally based. And so again, that goes back to this whole idea of these layers of ourselves have stories in them, the aspects of our lives that are meaningful to us, to revive that the Prophet ﷺ, the first thing that was revealed to him was Iqra, read. And so it's not just about reading books, it's about reading the meaning of our life, like what's really meaningful to us. And in a personal way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created each of us like a unique story, a unique lineage, a unique set of talents to be able to realize. And when we have meaning, then we have resilience. So I think that's the last thing I'd like to say. When there's no meaning, when people lose meaning, then life just becomes really stressful and, unfulfilling and unhealthy. So with more meaning, I think there'll be more health. That's it.
Beautiful. Thank you for that.
Both Sister J Star and Imam Kama Ayubi, like this was such an important and very beautiful talk or like teaching session for all of us. It is definitely like I've learned a lot about during this talk. I just want to mention that a few folks ask if this is recorded, is being recorded, and that's definitely true. So inshallah, we'll email it afterwards, and I think we'll post on Facebook. If you have any questions or you want to ask a question in person, please just if you want to ask a question directly, just mention it in the chat session and we can unmute you, or you could unmute yourself if that's available. But I just want to reflect that I loved actually about the talk about the different kinds of nafis. SubhanAllah, I did not know that there were this many, and just talking about the various things we can do, and just hearing you, Sister J, just about that you felt the most connected. This is just so deep, and that's actually true. I felt the same way at some point when I had to work for like a week or longer at a time in Ramadan. I felt completely disconnected. Now, subhanAllah, you have so many ways to connect to the masjid. And then, yes, it was a hardship, the whole COVID-19, but I think there are a lot of things that we will benefit from as a community. And this is definitely one of this. While I was listening to both of you, like it just occurred to me, like this is like we have so many talented and professional community members that definitely we need to tap into much more often. And inshallah, we'll see if we could have you both at some point in the future, inshallah, for more sessions. I want to remind folks about next week, Saturday, May the 9th, we have a stress and anxiety in children session by Dr. Ahmed Zubairi. And the following Saturday, we have a COVID survival guide by Dr. Shumaila Yunus. Both are from our community members and they are psychiatrists. I'm just trying to see here, I see just comments that it is, people are enjoying it. I just want to give maybe 1 minute to see if anyone has questions before we, inshallah, end.
And I'll just add while we're reading to that question that Brother Wasim, may God reward you for putting this together, for organizing speakers and placing the flyer together. And also particularly thank you for helping to create space. You know, it's, as a woman, there aren't many opportunities that we've had for women to speak in the masjid. And I am certainly the least worthy. We have so many sisters who have incredible, mashallah, knowledge to offer. And I hope that inshallah we'll be able to move forward to a masjid where we can learn more from our sisters as well.
Barakallahu feekum. I don't want to take more of your time, but I appreciate you both joined and gave us all this knowledge, and jazakumullah khairan. Yes, for the person who's asking if it is being recorded, yes, it is recorded, and inshallah it will be shared. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. جزاكم الله خيرا والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.